Thank you everybody for coming and spending the day and afternoon with us. I'm just going to briefly introduce the panel. I have the pleasure of introducing Stephanie. Not only is she a family friend of mine, but she's also an executive leadership coach and has done a lot of one-on-one executive coaching over the years. I noticed a bit of a difference when she coaches men and women. So she was very excited to moderate our panel for us today, and I'll let her take it over from here. Thank you for coming.
You're going to hear a little bit about all of us in just a minute. Before that, I would love to hear from 2 or 3 of you about what made you want to come to this panel today. Yeah.
I was just sharing this, that's in my head. I work on campus and I employ a lot of student staff. And something that I really wanted to get out of this conference and get out of it specifically is being an effective manager as a female to young men that are really entering the workforce and really entering their first level of professional development, and how I can empower them to empower other women, because as women we need allies. And I think it's really important to start at that level and work our way up.
So you want to know how to be a great boss to men.
Yeah.
Awesome. I love that. Okay. In a male-dominated field, how do you lead the men? I love it. 1 or 2 other thoughts. Yes, right here.
Hi, my name is Elena Bokut-McKesson, and it's a white male company. In addition to that, it's a metrics company, so a lot of it's with different influence. It's selling, it's not telling people what to do. I'm always looking for ways how to be a better communicator and leader when it comes to metrics organizations.
I see. So you're looking for more information about how to be influential in a male-dominated environment. Excellent. Oh, this is great. How about from you?
I've been in Silicon Valley for a month now, so very, very So I just wanted to come here and learn more, because I'm in a company where there aren't as many women.
Okay. All right. 1 more right here, Jessica.
I had gone from nonprofits, very female dominated, and to an MBA program, which is very male dominated, and now I've been in tech for 2 months, which is driving me crazy, male dominated. So I want to hear answers kind of to the pipeline problem, is what can we do now? Because one of the questions I have for my company is where can, continue the sentence, there's a pipeline problem. And what are you doing now? So anything as far as looking ahead to the future goes would be nice too.
Okay, excellent. All right. Well, as Lexi mentioned, I'm an executive leadership coach. Maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I was in your shoes. I was an MBA student, president of the Women in Management Club at another top business school. Spent 7 years at McKinsey and started coaching about 4 years ago. The coaching aspect of consulting was always my favorite part of the job, so I made it 100% of my job. And when I coach leaders, and most of my clients are men because it's a male-dominated business environment that we're in, but I have male and female clients, there's really 3 things I coach them on. 1 is purpose. What is it they want to do in this world? What does success mean to them? The second is pleasure. You're going to spend most of your waking hours at work. Might as well enjoy it. So how do you boost the joy and pleasure in your job? And then finally, performance. How can you be a rock star? And if you can get purpose, pleasure, and performance in your job, you're doing well. So I would love for you to get to know a little bit about each of our panelists, and I really want to focus on the success aspect. This panel is about how to be successful in male-dominated fields. And success means different things to different people. So as our panelists introduce themselves, they're going to give you a little bit of a flavor of what has made them successful. What are they really proud of that they've accomplished so far in their careers? And we'll start here with Deepa.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Deepa Purushothaman. I'm a partner at Deloitte, and I've been there for 15 years. I've been a partner for 7 years. And I joined out of grad school. So I went to Wellesley for undergrad, went to London School of Economics and did a degree in development economics, and then went to Kennedy School. So I thought I'd be doing politics. I thought I'd do consulting for a year and get out. And here I am 15 years later. You can tell that I've loved it and been challenged by it. I focus a lot in the telecom, media, and technology space. I've jumped around quite a bit, so I spent most of my career in the wireless space, so working mostly with men, almost exclusively with men, because I work a lot in the IT space and a lot in the CFO space, and particularly in the operations space. And then I went to media in New York for a couple of years, and then about a year ago, I moved here to the West Coast. I got married 6 months ago, and he was here. I was on the East Coast. I married another partner at Deloitte, so my answer to work-life balance is to marry it. And so, it's been quite a transition, and so I'm figuring it out. I'm leading one of our largest projects in the firm where we're helping a large tech company with a split, a global, a split of the decade, or I guess a split of the millennium, as people call it. So it's quite intense, it's quite interesting, and it's quite a shift to move from wireless to tech and kind of realize how different I was just sharing the culture is here on the West Coast. It's been a little bit of transition for me. Within Deloitte, I do a lot in the inclusion and diversity space, so I lead our Asian Business Resource Group. I was also the first female who of Indian descent to make partner in consulting, and so for me that was a big milestone and a big sense of identity. Which was 7 years ago, so although I appreciate the clapping, that's kind of an interesting statement. In my free time, obviously just got married and bought a house and trying to figure that part of my life out now, but I also am helping build a school in India, so a leadership academy for girls. And so leadership and women are really, it's core to who I am, and I have found ways to make Deloitte part of that. And so a lot of my definition of success is being authentic, is doing things the way that I want to do them. So I'm known for being a little rebellious within the firm, kind of doing it my own way, but also finding ways for me, purpose and pleasure really link back to, I don't do it for the money. I don't do it for some of the reasons people say you do consulting. I do it because I've enjoyed the client impact, I've been challenged, and because I've found ways to get involved in things that were really important to me, and I see it as a platform to do other things. And so that's what I think success is, and the definition of success for me has changed over the years. Early on, it was making partner, right? That was really motivated by I want to represent that. Then it was, what does it mean to be a female leader, and how can I be a role model to others? I think at this point, as I get married and figure out what's next, it's a little bit about what do I want to do, and what does purpose look like, and what does impact look like. And so it's a big question, a big transition for me as I ask those questions, and it kind of changes your day-to-day and how you focus on things. So,
Thanks.
Wow, thanks for putting me next to her. Right?
What she said.
My name is Larissa Rush. I'm a Haas MBA 97. I'm also on the Haas it's been about a year. I'm on the Haas board, which was great. I was about let's see. And so I went to Dartmouth undergrad, and I double majored in music and math and did my music career first, and actually worked in nonprofit performing arts. So also came from the very female-dominated nonprofit world, and came to Haas fully with the intention of going back into the nonprofit world. I decided I wanted to work for New York Philharmonic. My dad knew the general manager. It was kind of all set. 2 weeks in, we did net present value in corporate finance, and literally the heavens parted for me. I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen, to be able to use. I know. I do have a 12C in my bag. So normally, that's a calculator. But I thought it was really cool because I had studied theoretical math and theoretical music, and for the first time in my life, I could actually see how I could use those skills and actually use them for something. So I ended up getting an internship at a local San Francisco money management firm called Dodge & Cox, which was a teeny little 27 billion firm. When I started working for them, and got to go in and build models and be kind of geeky all summer long, and I loved it, and they invited me back full-time, and they actually put me on the corporate trading desk, which I had no interest in trading bonds, and I was immediately thrown into this completely male-dominated world where I was the only female institutional trader in the entire United States. had no idea. So here I am going from being in this very, female-centric, very embracing, very warm and fuzzy, lots of Kleenex and stuff, world to being entirely in this very testosterone-driven area. So I kind of pulled myself up by my bootstraps, and we can talk a little bit later about some of the things that I did to deal with that. But success for me really was figuring out who I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. And Dodge & Cox is not a firm where you can really move and transition. It's a very, very flat organization, and people kind of come in doing something, and you kind of stay in that for the next 35 years. So I've been there almost 18 years, and after about 8 years ago, I really had decided that I wanted to move into more of the client-facing. So I was involved in the trading and the research and the portfolio management side. But what I found was that I really loved working with clients and working with our large institutional clients and helping them achieve their goals. The defined benefit world is really, really changing. Pension Protection Act of 2006 really changed the landscape for many corporations, and many people are, kind of at a loss at how to manage for their employees' retirements, and I thought that would be very exciting. So over the next 8 years, I really lobbied for and made the case for moving more into that area, and started doing that full time in 2009. So for me, the success was in figuring out what it was that I wanted to do and actually getting there. So I'm actually doing what I wanted to do, what I always wanted to do in the job. So that's been success for me. I wasn't the first woman to make partner, but I was the first woman in my organization to wear pants. A big deal. Again, I kind of walked into it having no idea. I just, I was coming out of being a student. I didn't have a whole lot of money, and I didn't really like shaving my legs, so. And so I always wore pants, and so apparently that was kind of a big deal.
Hi, I'm Margot Hasselman. It's totally an honor to be sitting next to you two as well. My career has been in really different shape organizations from these two. I'm a Bolt grad from 03, so I went to school next door. Okay, thanks. Haas was like this mysterious big building that we sort of bumped into people in the courtyard from sometimes, but weirdly separate. Since law school, until last week, or I should say until this week, I worked at a law firm in Oakland called Lewis, Feinberg, Lee, Renaker, and Jackson. We do plaintiff side employment and employee benefits law. As of Monday, I started my own firm. Business cards that need reprints, but with the Renaker in that firm. And so she and I have gone out on our own and now have started our own little two-person firm in San Francisco doing similar work. And a lot of it has been in the employee benefits arena. And I'll say that I don't think you or your clients have ever been on the other side of a case from us, so you must be doing a good job. Because one of the things we do is sue people who are mismanaging defined benefit plans. So nice work. So Lewis Feinberg grew a great deal while I was there, and I had, recently, one of the questions was, the big question is, what has success meant to you, and how has that evolved? And that certainly evolved for me. It's been 11 and change years now that I've been practicing law, and until this week it was all at one organization. But that organization had changed quite a bit over the years, primarily growth. And one of the realizations and learnings that I did in the last couple of years was that at this point, the way that I was defining success was in part that I wanted to own a much smaller organization. I was a part owner at Lewis Feinberg after a number of years. Had a pretty small piece of that, but that in part that I'm at a point in my career where if I'm going to be in the for-profit sector, that I do want to be. I do think I should be owning a piece of that business. I'm kind of past the point where I feel like it makes sense to be. To have a lot of bosses, but at the same point, that was no longer the business that I wanted to own. It's a very legitimate business, but in terms of the fit with my personality and risk profile and things like that, I wanted to be in a different business. And that is something that I think it's really important to be constantly re-examining. Your life is going to change, and what success means and feels like in the first few years out of, I think we are mostly hot students, we're mostly talking about people with professional degrees here, what that looks like for the first few years might really change, and what's achievable might really change too. Your powers to influence your role in an organization are going to hopefully increase as your skills increase, as your experience increases, and that's partly where I found myself in the last few years. So some things that I've been really proud of, though, is I've gotten to be a part of some cases that have done some real good for people. I work on the plaintiff side. I represent employees and retirees and disabled people with employment law problems, and do have this nerdy focus on employee benefits. So I get to both help, look at people's medical records and help them get the disability benefits that they should get, and we also get to figure out how guaranteed investment contracts work and whether they're a scam or not, and whether they should be part of people's retirement portfolios, or sue a company who has where the owner has sold the company to an employee stock ownership plan for a vastly inflated price, that kind of stuff too. So we get to do the math side, and we get to do a very human side as well. So that's one reason that I've enjoyed that funny little niche of the law that I fell into. But something that you said about the nonprofit sector being much more female dominated, I will say that my area of the law, working on the plaintiff side, I've been in a for-profit entity the whole time, but when I went into law school, I figured I'd be working for nonprofits. I figured I'd be working for government. I went in to do public service, and I view the work that I do as public service. I do try to turn a profit at it, but there's a category of clients that I'm interested in helping, and that hasn't ever been the big companies. And so, the size organizations that a lot of these, and this is in no way meant to be a critique at all, but those are the places where we tend to be challenging the work that I do, and the people who do the work that I do tend to be challenging the practices at those companies. And I love meeting people who are improving them from the inside. That is so important. And in that public service space, even in the private practice side, it's somewhat less male dominated than the large scale corporate law firms. The organization sizes tend to be much smaller. There are, small women-owned firms out there that you don't tend to see that kind of ownership, that kind of gender balance in the ownership structure in a bigger organization, a bigger law firm. And some of that is due to people leaving big firms and starting their own shops, getting tired of that pathway up. And then we do partner with nonprofits, and a lot of because of the style of work we do, and it is public service oriented, even when we're trying to make money at it, there are a lot of the strengths that are widely regarded as leading to success in plaintiff side work are often more aligned with traditional views of women's strengths than mergers and acquisitions law. So, and that's not to say it's not male dominated, because still, who the executive directors are at the nonprofits and who the managing attorneys are at the firms, that's still much, more male than female. And there's certainly plenty of, testosterone in arguments and negotiations. But it's something that I wanted to highlight, that the aspect of law that I have worked in is a little less male dominated than some elements of the legal industry.
One thing I'm curious about is this term male dominated, and what we mean by that. So what does it mean to you? How do you know when it's become male dominated? How does it feel? And the reason I ask is because that can mean different things to different people. So there's some curiosity about what's the difference between a female dominated versus an evenly mixed versus a male-dominated environment. So what does a male-dominated environment mean to each of you, or to any of you?
For me, I think it's partly numbers, and it's where those numbers are. Is it law as an industry where the majority of law students for years now, law schools are majority female, and junior level attorneys are majority female, and as you move up the chains, especially at the larger organizations where there are long chains to follow, it's more and more male. And some of that is age isn't quite the right word, but some of that is tenure, if you will, that some of that is pipeline and the changing pipeline, but it's not all changing pipeline by any means. So that's part of it. Who's in charge?
I'm mostly interested in what is the impact of it being male dominated on you.
Yeah, so I think for me, I can talk about, so a lot of what I do is client service. So I have my own experience of that within the firm, right? And for those of you that don't know Deloitte, we have 30,000 people in the US just in consulting, right? So a huge organization. And then I do client service, which means I go from client to client and do advisory work for them. And so for me, it's a simple statement around impact. Like when I walk into a room, am I simply hit by the fact that I'm one of the only female? And when I say one of the only, I am often, whether it's internally in a leadership forum and there's 100 partners, maybe there'll be 10 females, I'm one of 10, right? At the client situation, it's been very similar, given I do a lot of wireless and did a lot of work on the East Coast. I was often the only female or woman in a boardroom. I had a client, when some of the questions, it reminded me of a story. I worked at a client who did wireless in Latin America. I would often show up at the client in Latin America and they'd be like, where's first of all, they don't know what DIPA means, right? So they don't know if DIPA is a male or female. And I'd show up and they'd be like, where is DIPA? I'm her. Okay, so where's the partner? And so it's impact, right? It's perception. And in that client, it was quite interesting because I had one of the junior staff at that client actually say to me, you're the first woman who's ever sat in the boardroom at the C-suite at that client. And not only did you change and impact, Deloitte for your impact, but you've actually changed our perception of what it means to be in that room for the client. And so when I talk about difference, it's significant. It's not, it's not 40, 60. It's often I am one of the only ones, and having to deal with very senior people who have biases around what that looks like and what that means, right? And many, many stories around how you confront that and how you accept that, and how, for me, it used to be a big chip, right? I think I spent a lot of my career trying to prove, well, I can do it just as well, or what does it mean to be in a room and sit across from an executive and have a conversation. And somewhere about 3-4 years ago, I let that go, and it stopped being about proving that and just realizing it doesn't matter, and that's about them and it's not about me, and I'm going to give that back. But that was a really important step for me. But to answer your question, it is very much, you walk in a room and you feel it and you see it, and the numbers are staggeringly different.
Yeah. And for me also, all of the stories about trading. So for those of you who aren't in investment management industry or who aren't familiar with it, I had no idea about what this industry was. The way that it works is that there's an end client, let's say a big firm, we work for AT&T, so they're one of the clients I work with. You probably work with them too.
Yes, I've spent many years.
So AT&T. Right. So AT&T is an end client, so they have a pension plan, and then there's a money manager firm, and so Dodge & Cox, we manage $270 billion, so we manage money for a lot of institutions and a lot of individuals, and then there's what's most people know is the Wall Street firm, so you have like the Morgan Stanleys, the Merrill Lynch, the JP Morgans. What they do is they're kind of the intermediary between, if we're trying to manage money, we're having to trade with the broker-dealers, and the broker-dealers act as the intermediary between money managers, right? So that's the difference between like a buy-side firm, and they're called a sell-side firm. So even though my clients now, the people I spend most of the time with are the institutions, for many, many years, I was interacting primarily with the Wall Street firms and walking out onto the trading floor of then Salomon Brothers in the 1990s. As you descend the escalator down to the football-sized trading field, the smell of testosterone it's neither good nor bad. It just is, and it's a field which has lent itself very much to risk taking and very much kind of a very aggressive sportsmanship like atmosphere. And so a lot of most of the analysts are men. So most of the analysts you're meeting with are men, in addition to the traders. And even now on the client side, I'm experiencing the same thing. So that most of the representatives that I'm working with at these large corporations are men as well. So if you go to conferences, it's the same thing. You're like, okay, there are 200 people in the firm, and there are the other 2 women. And so it's just going in there, and the way that I always approached that was I never really ever thought of myself as a woman, right? I always thought of myself as an analyst or a trader or a portfolio manager or whatever. And so sometimes I would be taken aback by those things where there was a comment made about being the woman, and I'd be like, oh, right. And what's the point there? More recently, I think I've taken a lot of the same approach where it's, yes, you put the gender part aside, but you also, that part of that is embracing who you are and realizing that the people on the other side are doing the same thing. And so it's not passing any judgment about, what skills people have, but just kind of recognizing people who for who they are and their strengths and shortcomings and trying to make the connections over that.
In what ways has your gender been to your advantage?
I'll start quickly because it was kind of a funny story so I start with the firm, and I'm initially the desk analyst. So I'm sitting on the desk, and I'm supposed to be the liaison between our in-house team of industry analysts and the trading desk. And the Asian financial crisis happens, and Russian defaults in the debt and long-term credit. So we've got all these things blowing up on the desk, and they say, oh, we really need another person on the trading desk. And, I'm over there to kind of go, just keep your head down, don't let anyone see you. And they're like, Larissa, come, we want you to trade the finance sector. Well, first of all, they don't teach you anything about finance in business school. You learn about making widgets. And so you don't learn about banks and how banks run themselves or insurance companies or REITs. And God forbid you have to teach yourself statutory accounting, which is the insurance industry, or how banks create and measure capital. And so I get put on the trading desk, and so I'm having to learn about how to analyze banks and how to trade banks, and I'm realizing that every single person I talk to is a man, right? And the person who's training me is a man. And when you're trading with Wall Street, there's, at least when I started in the late 1990s, it was very much about, as I said, this kind of sportsmanly combat, daily combat. And so we all wore headsets, and we'd be pacing around I'm going to have to say some things that are maybe a little off color here, but you'd be like, no fucking way I'm going to get it. You got to fucking give me better, and it's just this, like, very, very aggressive, right? I grew up in Connecticut. The first time my mom heard me speak like that, she's like, that must be how you speak at work. So I did this for a couple of years, and then I realized, wait a minute, I'm the only woman that they talk to all day long. Wonder if I could use that to my advantage. So that was a pretty easy one, and then that was also part of figuring out, well, what are my strengths and how do I differentiate myself? Because in the bond market, it's very much. It's not like equities. Equities trade on exchange, so all bonds are negotiated over the counter, which means it's a person-to-person transaction. And so if I want to buy a block of bonds that somebody has, I have to make sure that I'm the first person that trader calls. So I need to figure out how to make myself, sort of ingratiate myself to that person. And so it was just, thank you, Holly Schroet. If anyone has not taken her negotiations course, you should all take it because it's amazing, and you learn all kinds of life lessons in that course. But a lot of it is figuring out what you can bring to the table. So that was very useful.
I think mine would be similar. I think I learned early on when I had to sit across from executives and give them bad news that, there's different ways of doing that. And I am known for being very direct. And I actually think that being very direct, but being a woman, allows me to kind of tell an executive his company is broken, his baby is ugly, a lot of different things. And they're like, oh, okay. It's a very, and I don't, it's not a conscious let me use that, but I have found it really fascinating. My male colleagues will give the same news, and it's confronted with a very aggressive sort of, no, it's not that way. So I think there is something to how you deliver messages, tough messages, that maybe is softened just by what their impression is and what they're sitting against. I also think it's, although it's a negative to walk into a room and have to kind of I'm the partner and that's what I'm doing. There's also a little bit of, I do have fun with it every once in a while. So I was telling the story of Latin America. I was in Argentina and I walked into the room and I, was there early and the rest of the team was still getting there and I was jotting down some notes. And the client, senior executive, walked in and kind of looked around and said, "Oh, are you here to take notes? Where's the coffee?" or something like that, right? In Spanish. And I kind of pointed to it, and I said, "Can I walk you to it?" But I didn't tell him who I was. Then about 20 minutes later, we started the meeting, and I stood up and took over and explained what I was there to do. And he was, you could see the blood. So I think it's partly, again, you can't let, I believe you can't let what you represent, you can't be responsible for the impression people have when you walk in a room, but know that it's defined within, 30 seconds of you being there, whatever that looks like. And it's up to you to change it. And I use that to my advantage in a lot of cases. I mean, there's been times where I've walked into someone's room and they're not really interested in talking to a consultant. And they'll say, "Give me 15 minutes. And in 15 minutes, I can't tell you something you don't know. I'll cut the meeting short." I think I can do that in a way that my male colleagues struggle with a little bit. So I think it's just understanding what you're good at, and it's about being authentic to yourself. I'm very big on, it took me a long time to find my style, but once you have that style, to be aware that some of that is gender-based, some of that is what you're perceived as when you walk in the room, right? I'm 5'1", I'm also little, right? I wear huge heels. There's all those kinds of other little things that play into power and what people perceive when you walk in a room. And so it's kind of understanding all of that and realizing, again, it is what it is, and using your own skills and your own strengths to your advantage.
I think that one thing that women are really socialized to do a lot of from an early age is read the room and read the people emotionally, right? For lots and lots of reasons. Some of them safety, some of them just like what we're taught to do and how we're told to be, right? And I think that is something that I wouldn't have really thought of until really recently. That's like the water I swim in. I hardly know it's there, but like fairly recently have gone, oh, that's actually something that I'm really good at. I can walk into a room and tell, who wants. And during the course of say a negotiation or argument, I got a pretty good read on, how people are responding, and I think that that's partly individual, but I do think that there's definitely an aspect. There were a lot of nods at the beginning there that I think that some of that is having grown up a girl and been a girl and been a woman. There's a lot of times in litigation in particular, like we're always up to something, right? Like we have a client and we have a goal, and like I try to be a straight shooter because I don't like to be dishonest, but also like there are tactics. Like if I'm talking to somebody that is not on the same side as my client, is either an opponent or a neutral, in a case, and I have a goal in that conversation. And there are a lot of times, I think one of the tricky things is sometimes you take that assumption about what your role is, and the sort of simple term would be the underestimating that sometimes happens. And we're faced with a choice a lot about, am I going to challenge that, or am I going to try to use that for a tactical advantage in a way that is maybe not going to help long term politically? Like, part of it is, do I want to teach this person that I am in charge and they shouldn't underestimate me, or am I going to play around with the fact that they're underestimating and get something out of them as a result of that? And that's something that every time I am faced with that choice, which happens a little less now that I'm like a little older, that assumption that I might be in charge is starting to come. But that like it's a little uncomfortable. And every time I've sort of like smiled and been super charming with, say like a witness that I'm deposing or something, I was like, thank you for coming and listen. So try to set it up as a conversation and flirt a little bit. It's kind of gross. Totally works. Like, not everybody, but I got used to, because in part the fields are in, I got used to deposing middle-aged men who were just like, oh, hey, there's this like 28-year-old woman. We're gonna like talk all day, that was great. And like the first 2 depositions I took were middle-aged dudes, and day 3, a woman was a witness, and I was like, hi, thank you for coming. So listen, and she was like, and I went, oh, right, okay. I gotta recalibrate. Yeah, I gotta go boss on her. Okay. But so that's been an interesting sort of path to walk.
And that's an interesting segue to another observation and question I have for you, which is one of the primary reasons companies bring me in to coach a lot of women is to boost what's called executive presence. This woman needs better executive presence. And so I'm curious for any of you, and you don't all need to answer this, what does executive presence mean to you, and what does that look like to be a woman with executive presence in a male-dominated environment?
So it's a huge word in consulting that gets thrown around a lot, right? And especially when you go through the partner process, for those of you that don't know. And this is being videotaped, so I'm aware of that, and I'm going to ignore it. When you go through the partner process, we joke that it's kind of like hazing, right? It's a year-long process where you are continually putting forth your value proposition to the firm. And a lot of the conversation that you have is, does that person have executive presence? And I think it's really interesting, not only from a gender perspective, but also from a diversity perspective, right? Being Indian or being Asian, sometimes executive presence may for me or others who are like me, may be a little bit more quiet, may not be kind of in your face. And so I think executive presence is sometimes used as a code for confidence or aggressive/assertive. And I think it's changing. I think there's many different ways to be confident, but I think, because the impression is, and I always use this statement, and again, it's being videotaped, but do you have to be a 42 long, drink beer and like football to be a partner and to be successful? Primarily because a lot of what I'm doing is selling, right? And it was a really big dialogue. I got a lot of feedback as I was senior manager that I didn't have it, and that they were really worried about me having it because I'm quiet. And quiet is also code for executive presence sometimes. And I went through the partner process. My first year was going to be practice. And I worked with an executive coach to present, and I did so well that I just went through. And so it was kind of an interesting experience to hear that for so long and really say, well, what does that look like? What does that mean? And honestly, I think it's really about confidence. And I think times are changing in what that looks like for people. I think depending on the organization you're in, you have to be aware of what that means. It's going to be different in a consulting firm than maybe in a law firm than in where you were, maybe a lot more aggressive and assertive, and you have to curse a lot, So I think it's really just being conscious of what the organization looks at, what the leaders look like, and I think understanding, do you have to fit into that mold, and if you don't, then how are you going to be successful? I did not feel that I had to fit into that mold. And so that's part of, I think, the dialogue that many of us have. And so, I think executive presence really comes down to confidence. And I think for a lot of women, early in my career, I struggled with that, right? And you and I were talking about this before. There's something called the imposter's complex, right? And so it's this idea that women have to know everything. And I describe it as I used to carry around this sack on my back, and I was constantly trying to put my arms in the air so you couldn't see how big the sack was. And the sack is my insecurities, right? And somewhere, as I got closer to being a partner, I just let that go and stopped focusing on the things I don't know and started focusing on the things I was good at. And that began to shift, the power perception and the answer around executive presence. I don't think there's anyone you'd ask in the firm right now and that they would tell you I don't have executive presence, which is fascinating because I didn't change as a human being. I think it's just I got a little bit louder and bolder and just spoke my mind a little bit more and got comfortable in my skin. And I think that's true for everybody, so I don't think this is a male-female thing, but I think sometimes as women it does take us a little bit longer to get comfortable in our skin and find our style, just because there's less role models that look like us.
Mm-hmm. So. You go too far, though?
Mm-hmm. Around executive presence?
Being too assertive, being too forward.
I think there are, I'll answer that. I think there are women that do or maybe push that. I have never been accused of that. I think, again, because of probably I'm a little bit more quiet and, a couple of other things. And so for me, that's never been the case. I get accused of pushing the envelope a little bit too much, which is slightly different than being aggressive and assertive. And I think it's a delicate balance. I mean, it's still true. If you are brazen and you do speak your mind too much, that there's certain words that you also get called, right? And it's a balance around all that. But I do think it's about, I think times are changing, and it's about finding an authenticity within yourself and going forward with that. And you have to figure out if your organization supports that and is ready for that sort of change. And there's softer and stronger ways of doing that.
I sort of had a question along those lines. Just how do you find a balance between playing the game and then changing the game? So right now the game is very male dominated, and you want to be able to play the game in order to get into that position or into that industry or that executive manner, but at the same time you sort of want to change the game as a woman and make it a more welcoming area for women, or a more, not easier opportunity, but more opportunity for women to become executives. So how as a woman do you balance playing the game but also try and change the game too?
I would say you have to work as hard as anyone else in the field, whether it's a man or a woman, right? And I think, after I graduated from college, I used to always like to challenge, people's perceptions of me. So I learned how to ride a motorcycle. And one of the things that I learned when you're learning how to ride a motorcycle is as you're going through the cones, if you look at the cone, you will hit it. So you have to keep your eyes on, which is not fun when you're on a really heavy motorcycle. So it's important to always keep your eyes on the horizon, and I think that metaphor lends itself to the work field as well. And so maybe the balance isn't, how do you change the game, but if you're thinking about just being the best that you can be, it's eventually you get recognized for what you're doing, hopefully, and if not, then maybe you're not in the right place. I feel fortunate that I was in a place that would allowed me to grow and change and move into the things that I really enjoyed doing and that I was really good at. But I think that the mistake that so many women in particular make is that we try to do it alone. And so many times I think we can actually change things by linking arms, and I think women also tend to do that a lot more often than, I'm just going to put my head down and I'm going to work hard and I'm going to get recognized. It's that figuring out how to reach out and connect with other women that gives you the opportunity. But the first thing you have to do is you have to do at least as well as everyone else, and then maybe, like for me with the trading, I had to go a couple notches more because, you walk in and, as Deepa says, I actually dyed my hair brown because I'd walk onto the trading floor and they'd see, and I used to have long blonde hair, and it was, immediate assumption was, well, she's blonde, so she's stupid. And I was like, I got tired of having to overcome that. So you just had to gather that much more information just as a starting point.
I don't know.
Go ahead.
And I don't know that this is not advice I'm giving. It's more I can only talk about my own experience. I don't know. I guess I don't see it as playing a game. I have always said I did not make partner, and I don't. And at the moments that I don't enjoy it, I will leave. It's not a life commitment where I'm handcuffed in the ways that I think other folks are. And part of that is never living above your means. But I don't do it for those reasons. And so I think part of it is where that value system comes from. And so for me, it was never about playing the game. But I also do agree with you that it's about being good at what you do, and you have to have that because that's table stakes. And then it's about having the support within the organization to help pull you. So I think there are aspects of being one of the first women or being a woman in any of these organizations where I, for example, got opportunities that I don't know some of my male peers got, and it's a constant discussion we have. Did I get that because I have a different point of view, or there was a different voice they were looking for. And early on, I used to really be offended by that, and I used to hate being what I called the poster child, and used to get into all kinds of dialogues about it. And I had a really great sponsor or mentor who said to me at one point, have a seat at the table, now make it a voice at the table. And so I think part of it is getting over yourself a little bit and stop worrying about the game so much. That's how I've approached it. There are a lot of people that do play the game and they're successful at it, but that's just not who I am as a person, what I'm good at. So again, it comes back to what are you trying to accomplish and what makes you happy and how do you tick, and figuring that out first and then making it great for the folks that come around you. Because I think if you enjoy what you do and you make your world better, what you can control, it resonates a little bit and makes it better within the organization.
I don't disagree with any of that, but I would also say that, there are headwinds. You guys have talked really eloquently about the ones that you've had as well as the ways that you've turned them into your favor. And also, I think that balance can shift a lot, right? I would think that people should be constantly thinking about what game they want to be in, and that your ability to change it is going to increase as you gain some recognition. We're lucky. I'm lucky. I haven't had to go out and hack a path myself. I haven't been, the first female lawyer in anything, and that's, there are fields that are more and less welcoming to women, but we're at a point here where there is a lot of equality left to achieve, but it's not hacking right at the beginning, right? And I think that's especially more true for white women. And I think that we have to acknowledge where there's, intersections of privilege and oppression happening. But I also think that your ability, you might have to play to get to a position to change. And what game you want to be in is something that I would encourage everybody to be constantly reassessing. I know for me, I starting out and even farther on, I wasn't really sure that I wanted to stay at the same firm. I wasn't sure that I wanted the traditional linear path of associate to shareholder or partner, and then what does that mean? What are my goals? Am I trying to change this industry? Am I trying to make millions? I wasn't sure about that, and every time I felt like should I let that be known or not? That felt super risky, right? Or do I need to just be performing that I am going right and down the line that everybody might assume? Regardless of the fact that I might actually be reassessing my goals all the way along. And that feels really risky. Every time I said, I don't want to take that responsibility because I need to be gone that weekend playing my sports. Like, I have something that I have time dedicated to outside of work that I'm going to choose. Anytime I did that, especially as a junior lawyer, that felt like, how's this going to come back? Even in, the type of firm that I was in, which was comparatively pretty friendly and pro people having lives and, things like that. Even there, there is a game. So those are my answers to that.
And one of the underlying questions or tensions that I'm hearing in your question is, how do you strike the right balance of being authentic in yourself and adapting to be more effective in that situation?
Yeah.
And when I coach leaders, this always comes up. How can I be authentic, and in what ways can I adapt to be more effective while also being authentic? It's a bit of a conundrum. So one of the questions I have for the panelists, and I'd love for each of you to formulate an answer for yourself, is this. What is a trait you had as a little child that you still have that's helped make you successful? So we're going to hear from the panelists, and I'd love for you all to be ruminating on your own answer to that question.
Starting down.
Anyone who wants to go.
Thinking about that question ahead of time was definitely a think piece. Yeah. And I think the best answer I have for that is imagination. I was a kid who played by herself a lot. Kind of small town, went to a little school, didn't go to public school till I was in middle school. Kind of wandered around my yard a lot, and told stories in my head and things like that. And I think that plus what I mentioned earlier about really reading people emotionally and anticipating how people would respond. I think those are both things that I have always had that have helped as an attorney. Forecasting potential outcomes, and making good judgments about the potential outcomes of different strategy choices. But I think that some of that comes from kind of making stuff up and thinking about what might happen next.
Thanks.
Yeah, Jess, you want to go?
Sure. So I would say it's probably a couple things. I think when I was little, and I still have this trait, I guess some people would call it stubborn. I call it determined. So if I want something, not that no is not an answer, but I will find a way to make it happen. And so it's a drive. It's seeing something through. I also was the only girl that played on all my soccer teams until I was in college. So I would literally be the only girl in tournaments with 10, 12 other soccer teams. And so for me, being different or being the odd one out or being the only girl or woman on something just wasn't it was what it was. And so those kinds of things I think really helped. I also think although my parents were very progressive, they're Indian, and so there was something a little bit to, if maybe early on, they would never trade now, but early on, if they could have had boys, it's me and my sister, they might have, preferred boys. And so whenever, my dad wanted to motivate us to do something, motivate me, because I'm the older one, he'd say, well, if I had a boy, he would go, cut the grass, he'd go, do that. And so I would go out there and, just to prove I could do it. So there's a little bit of tell me I can't do something, and I'll go show you that I still have, and I think it's been really helpful.
Yeah, I struggled with this one too. It's always, I meant to call my mom and ask her. That whole thing about, how people perceive you and how you perceive yourself. What the word that I keep coming back to is bossy, which I know it's like the B word now.
Bad boss.
You always have leadership potential.
Yeah. I have 2 younger brothers, and so I was always, managing them. Which is, I love all of this. Thank you, Sheryl Sandberg, for making that word okay. But I always thought of it as goal-oriented. I mean, I always had even from a very young age, I had a 5-year plan, 10-year plan. And even now, I feel like that helps me because no matter what situation I'm in, I always have a very clear idea of where to go. So I don't have a whole lot of self-doubt, and that can serve you well sometimes, especially when areas, it's all team decision making, just in case anyone's investing in our funds. You're not just relying on me. But it helps to have that and to have always had that, to just be at least very clear on what direction I want to go in.
And what is a way in which you've had to adapt in order to be successful? What is a piece of advice you might offer to women in this room about in what way you may need to adapt to be successful in a male-dominated environment?
I'll say I kind of have the opposite of that. I'm not a 5-year planner or a 10-year planner. The positive way to say that is that I've been flexible. And, you strengths and weaknesses, and I'm learning to, I would say in part, learning to use the traits that I do have instead of struggling to try to have a different brain. But I think that's actually it's allowed me to just kind of jump on opportunities that have worked and then apply what you want, what I want to that. And in terms of, specifically as a lawyer, a case strategy, being flexible and responding to changed circumstances really comfortably. And that's not incompatible with, also having a longer term plan, but that's been true for me. But I've always tended to have the imposter syndrome and the self-doubt, and having to learning to try to set that aside and believe in the things, the skills that I have gained and the judgment that I have gained has been something that I've had to pretty consciously work on. And one thing that I started doing that I recommend to, whenever there's some other junior lawyers in the firm looking for the way to kind of jump onto the next level in their career, I don't mean in terms of getting a title change, but I mean in terms of what their abilities are, is I force myself to shift a mindset of always checking with someone else about a choice. Instead of saying, what do you think we should, here's the situation, what do you think we should do? Shifting to, here's the situation, here's what I think we should do. Do you agree? Which helped me both in terms of my own internal processes, realizing, you know what, this is a decision that I can make. And that's how I would get the practice without jumping straight out of the nest, to test the judgment that I was building. And also in terms of how you're presenting to the people that you are checking with, who are presumably are often going to be senior to you or at least appear. And so just that shift of forcing myself to rewrite that email really helped me move out of that imposter syndrome and into a place of just being able to do stuff on my own.
I think for me, it was a little bit around deference. So linked to confidence and linked to just, hierarchy and being deferential to who's in charge. And I think somewhere around the manager level, I got a lot of feedback around that and slowly just started to work on that. And there's not really a magic answer for that, but just start to get comfortable to kind of ask questions. It initially started as asking questions, and it started as putting forth ideas and kind of moved on to something else. So that was something early on. I think the other thing is really around sales. So my struggle before I went up as partner was I just wasn't convinced in myself that I could sell. And it was a real struggle I had. And it was one that I'm not sure I was convinced of when I first made partner, but I decided to go for it anyway. And right after I made partner, I made some of the biggest sales of the year in my group, and it just kind of happened. And so even around that, it was around realizing there are different ways to sell. So I'm not going to take my male clients out, every night or take them drinking, and that's how I'm going to sell a big deal. I don't do that. Like, so I'll do breakfast, I'll do lunch, I'll do family-oriented things where they'll bring their wives and we'll go to a game. It'll be slightly different, and I got really comfortable in selling much more relationship-based selling versus let me go close in a more aggressive sort of way over, alcohol or a very macho sort of sales approach. But it took me a long time to kind of get comfortable with that. So a little bit of confidence, realizing that's key, right? A lot of how you get promoted and how you are successful is around that. So it wasn't something I could get around, but finding ways to do that in my own style, and reaching out to other female partners to realize how they did it. So I'm painting a picture where it's me and I'm not. I mean, Deloitte is one of the most gender balanced firms you're going to find. It's still, even with that good balance, it's still not 50-50 in the room at the senior levels, right? And so for me, that was a really big thing that I just learned, that they're also women buyers, right? And so you start to realize as the world changes, some of the how it was 20 years ago isn't necessarily how it's going to be in the future, and just shift your thinking on some of that as well.
So in terms of advice, I would say that the biggest thing for me was to not try to be, the lesson that I learned was to not try to be a man, which seems so obvious, but when you're in it and everyone around you is a man, and everyone who's training you is a man, and I worked for a firm that has a lot of women, and it was one of the things that drew me to this firm, and I would say that that's another great thing to look for, because it's a good signal that they're going to respect you for who you are, and you're not going to get put in a box. So first of all, not trying to be a man, and not trying to be anything, not trying to be someone who you aren't. So that kind of goes back to your question about playing the game. It's, I think, the best way to be successful is to figure out how to be authentically yourself, which also sounds really obvious, but which is also not very easy. And one of the great pieces of advice that was given to me when I was going into this field is to make a list of all the things that I like to do, and on a separate page, not looking at that list, just make a list of all the things that I'm good at. And then to to take the two lists side by side and to look where there's overlap. Because going back to what Deepa said earlier, that you're going to be successful if you enjoy what you're doing, because it becomes this virtuous cycle where you enjoy what you're doing, and then you're doing more things that you're good at, and then you enjoy that. And so that allows yourself to become good and to be successful and to have that executive presence, because you have the confidence, because again, you're doing things that you like and you're good at, and other people will eventually recognize. It took me 8 years to get my firm to recognize that and to let me do that. But that was essential, and it continues. I have to keep making those lists, and when I work with, to your question about how to train, how to oversee your young people, I have a 25-year-old Chinese young man who's a recent hire, and I have him make those lists, because I want to, in order for me to manage him, I realize, hey, I grew up in Asia, but I don't know what motivates him. So I need to understand, in order to manage him, I want to understand what he thinks he's good at and what he likes to do. So that helps me then manage him, helps me help him set goals for himself that I think that he can achieve and that are in line with what I want to do. And then the last thing that I wanted to add is, and this is my husband made me promise to put this in here, is that the key, I think one of the big challenges for women in business right now is that we're being sold the promise that we can have it all. Right? And we all want to have it all. And whatever that means, it means something different for each person. But for me, I wanted to have, this amazing career that I've worked so hard for, after, spending so many years in school and building this up. And I wanted to have, be married. I wanted to have a child and have a home and have vacations and serve on boards and to help, other women, achieve the successes that they wanted to achieve. And he said, you have to remember to tell everyone that you can have it all. You just can't have it all at once. So, And figuring out how to do that is part of going back to that linking arms with people. It's linking arms, it's finding a spouse who's going to be understanding, finding some way to partner so that you don't have to do everything at home. Finding someone at work so that you can share things at work and have people who are mentoring you or understanding you or picking up the slack when you decide that you want to go to your kid's baseball game. And finding people in the community who are also going to support you. So it's figuring all of that out so that you can have episodes of having it all, just probably not all in the same day.
What else is on your mind? Let's go over here.
It's actually a follow-up to your comment, Deepa, around having a voice at the table. So in our morning keynote, two amazing women shared that they've had the same struggle, I'm sure you have as well, where you contribute an idea in a meeting or conversation, only to a few minutes later have that idea suggested by a man and suddenly it's recognized as valuable. So I'm just curious about strategies for either like reclaiming that contribution in the moment, or like how do you diffuse yourself and then come back after that to be heard at that next opportunity?
No, go ahead, no. I haven't figured that one out yet.
I get asked that question a lot. I do a lot of speaking in India especially, and so I get asked that question a lot there, more so than here. I don't know that I've experienced that all that much. But my advice to them is in that moment, I'm guessing there's a confrontational way to say that was my idea and get upset with it, or there's a way to maybe add on to that and say, okay, that's maybe what I was thinking, and here, let me add a little bit more of maybe what I was thinking, and that's actually really helpful. I don't have a perfect answer for you, but for me, that's how I approach some of it, because a lot of what we do, right, is brainstorming and group work. I haven't really found that to be as much of the case, but I think it's also a lesson in not taking things personally, right, and getting caught up in that moment. Is it more important to get the idea out and the end goal out, or is it more important to feel wronged? And I think both are valid, but you got to decide in that moment what's more important to you. And sometimes one wins and sometimes the other one.
Yes.
Yeah. One of the questions I'm curious about, and I've been in various male jobs like banking and consulting, and I made a shift to move out in part to prioritize my personal life. And so you came from that background, and so did you, Deepa. What kinds of choices do you think about and trade-offs did you make? Like in the job I consulting, you're traveling all the time. The personal life trade-offs are huge, and to me, that seems to be one of the reasons that the pipeline doesn't really grow, despite the fact that you have more people entering at the bottom. Do you think that's going to change? How do you associate that? Is that just like a choice we kind of have to accept?
I actually think it is changing, and the reason it's changing is because men are demanding it. And what I've seen, even in my male clients, which I think is a really positive sign, is men are taking 6 weeks of paternity leave at big companies, and their wives are not letting them not participate, and they're realizing that they want a family life and they want a marriage. So I do think there's a trend towards that. That said, it's always going to be a challenge. So what I would offer is that's why finding that purpose is so important, because the bar is so high to be away from your home life. So in addition to you want to reduce the quantity of hours, you want to make sure the quality of hours while you're there is really meaningful and energizing.
I would say that I'm still figuring that out. I agree. It's a conversation I have with many of my male colleagues, and I see a shift as well. My male partners are also asking for that space, for that time, for that allotment, and actually get pretty offended when people call it more of a woman's issue or something that women are demanding more. I think it was a really big issue probably until about 1.5 years ago for me, because I was a single woman. I mean, I was a single woman in a job where I was on a plane all the time and was around men all the time, yet, I'm going home on a Friday and I have 2 dogs, but, and I have a house and I have like the storybook, what people think is success, and yet I'm doing that alone. And so for me, for a long time, it was really about how do I create space to meet someone? again, I married it at work. So, and now we have two partners, right? We have two people who are managing ridiculous schedules and trying to figure that out. And I would say that he has more challenges with me because I have a hard time pausing than he does, and I get a lot of feedback that I'm not making those choices in the same way that he would. And he's wonderfully supportive and is taking more care of the dogs right now, given what I'm doing, than I am. And so I think part of it is finding the right people and the right support system. Early on, it was like simple things like I felt early on I had to do my own cooking and I had to do my own cleaning and all those sorts of things. And I love to cook, so I kept the cooking, but I started to be more comfortable in giving certain things away and prioritizing the time that I did have and what's important. But it's also really being clear about what the boundaries are. I heard early on from another female partner that she would, for example, block out time on her calendar in the morning. It was just block time, and she would take her kids to work at that time. Kids to school at that time, and she wouldn't tell people what she was doing. She would just block the time. And so it's little small strategies. I don't think it has to be big life events, but it has to be clarity in your mind of what's important and making it something that just happens. I also think generationally things are shifting. The 20-somethings are demanding it, right? We have people who say, I don't want to do this job if I can't do it with flexibility and I can't do it with something else. I don't want to be like those partners. And so I just think the workforce is changing, where some of that's going to have to be figured out, and we're really putting effort and energy around figuring it out.
Other questions? Burning questions? Yes, right here.
There was a really interesting article that came out a few weeks ago, written by two women in the tech industry who said, this is why I'm leaving tech and why many women are following me. And the gist of the article was something around, they were feeling like there's just an environment that's they just don't want to, it's not fun to be in. Nothing so bad that you would actually complain to HR about it or make a big deal about it, but just things tend to build up to the point where it's just not worth it anymore. And so my question is, how do we talk about these little things? Because I've experienced them myself, where it's just you're not going to make a big deal out of it. The guy was probably an idiot. He doesn't even know how he's acting. How do we address these things? And how do we, as a group of women, bring these to the forefront so that they can be addressed?
They're called microaggressions. Yeah. Like there's a word for that. And that really contributes to an overall atmosphere. I mean, I'm coming from an employment law standpoint. That's one of the really challenging things. One of those things that people can feel it, but it's really hard to, for example, get a judge or a jury to be like, oh, that right there, that was terrible. And yet everybody's nodding and everybody knows what that is. And I think part of it has to be, it's hard to make cultural shifts, right? That takes a lot of people and a lot of movement. And I think some of it has to be saying, you know what, this is worth talking to somebody about, whether it's this person or it's somebody who's in charge of that. There has to be some element of volunteerism to say, this is bumming me out. Let's try to do this another way. Similarly to a culture of, I was nodding so hard when you were talking about the male partners at Deloitte taking paternity leave. I think that's critical. I think that, women need to encourage the men in their workplaces to recognize, and that's hard, boy, because, you also want to just fit in. That's hard. That's a hard choice to make. But also encouraging the kind of stuff that means that the flexibility is just becomes a human issue and doesn't become a women's issue. And men are, negatively impacted by that assumption just as in a different way, but I think in just as damaging a way as women are. But I think, some of that is, it's hard. There has to be a point where people do say something, and otherwise, if you just check out, it doesn't change.
I also think it builds over time. So I think you have to have a good barometer within yourself when something is, slightly, maybe I didn't understand it correctly versus something is actually really, truly something that resonates with you. And I have found that sometimes in the moment, it actually relates back to the question around when someone takes your idea, sometimes in the moment you don't realize that it actually offends you that much. And I had an event, I had a situation in December where someone said something, and it was blatantly a problem. And in the moment, I tried to address it, and everyone else in the room kind of looked at me like, "We didn't hear that. What are you talking about?" And I went home and sat with it and couldn't sleep that night and decided I was going to come in the next day and have a different conversation about it. So I think sometimes it's also just less about again, in the moment and taking some reflective thought. And if it really does bother you, I think you have to do something about it. But I also think it's knowing when to pick your battles a little bit, you know, and only you know that, and only you know what was meant by it in those situations. And so I think that you have to take some of those on if you want to create change. But if you take every single one of those on, it's also hard to have a continual voice. And so it's knowing when.
I think there's also like a few places where that's all kind of responding to a negative. I also think that there are opportunities for people to go in and just say, hey, here's a little change that would be an improvement, where you're not having to attack somebody else, but you can go in and say, you know what, all the chairs in this conference room are gigantic, and I'm 5'3", and when I sit in them and my feet don't reach the floor, I feel like that impacts my credibility with our clients. Every law firm conference room is built for 6'2" people, and I have little legs. So let's get some chairs that have adjustable depth. So things like that. Like, do you have the physical environment? And you can go and ask for stuff like that helps maybe plant seeds of what kind of do we have the right amount of bathrooms? Do we have a nursing facility? Do we have hey, dude, your wife's due in a few weeks, so, are you going to take the 12 weeks, or, how are you going to do that? Like, talking about things in encouraging cultural shifts that are positive shifts can help create that environment where either it's easier to address the negative things, or you help chip away at the idea that those behaviors are acceptable.
If I can just add one more thing, I also think it's a little bit about power. And what I'd say to you is, some of the best advice I got early on, it not only applies to a client, my advisor said to me, never need a client or a sale more than you want a client or a sale. That applies to men, that applies to, life, it applies to everything. Never, and for me, I've taken it a little bit farther. I've taken it even to the job. Like, I can't let that define me. I can't let that be everything. And if I love the firm, I've been there for so long, it becomes part of your family. But I've gotten more and more real about, if it gets to the point where I have to make different choices, I can't be so locked in a situation that I can't make the choices that are authentic or necessary for me. So I think part of that is realizing, again, when and not to kind of push, but also just really being clear on what your limits are and what's important to you. And that helps drive a lot of behavior, and to know when maybe a situation's not good to walk away from. I just think that's a healthy place to be on a continual basis.
I am so sorry to tell you that our time is up. And my hope is that there was something about each of these women that resonated for you, and that you're continuing to see that there's no one way to lead, and there's no one way to be successful. Best of luck to all of you.